for our new people, we've been working our way through this book, Callings, Finding and Following an Authentic Life by Greg Lavoie. And callings are whispers of the soul, trying to nudge you or perhaps redirect you onto the path where, first of all, how the calls come to you through all sorts of different ways of, people that you meet, books that you read, dreams, synchronicities, even illness. And then we looked at ways that we can invoke those calls, invite the calls. The first and sort of biggest one was on pilgrimages, which don't have to be big long journeys away to Jerusalem or wherever. They can be vision quests, they can be setting off on a particular journey somewhere, and they can be as simple as walking the labyrinth. The last part that we were looking at here, and we're going to finish up with this today, are memory's vital secrets. In other words, using the past as a guide to the calls that we have been given. And he suggests in the book that only by looking back can we sometimes see things in proper perspective. The difference is that rather than staying or dwelling in the past, you're simply looking back and using whatever you see in order to help you move forward. So we're going to finish up the last part of this today. So he says the last place you think to look for a hero is among the downtrodden, the weak and the dispossessed. What good people once asked could come out of Nazareth. Yet it's the stuff of cliche, how often it happens just that way. That the least likely is the most likely to succeed. Jesus, Cinderella, Parzival, the ugly duckling. The last place we might think to look for a calling to is in the abyss. Yes, it often turns out that calls are echoes coming out of the chasms in our lives. The concentric rings spreading out from where something heavy was dropped into the pond. The shock waves from concussive events whose big bands sometimes split our lives into BC and AD, into marking time as that which came before it happened, the accident, the illness, the divorce, the tragedy, and that which came after it. In such a place, Lee Glickstein found his calling. I was called by my misery, he says, which he describes as the colossal frustration of not being able to express himself because he was tragically, excruciatingly shy. I didn't know how to be heard. I bottled everything up. I had so much to say and didn't even know what it was, because my means of communication had been so stifled growing up. He portrays his family, especially his father, as listening impaired. and himself as someone who had a lot to say, but for whom it was dangerous to say it. He was teased and told to shut up. He was ignored and humiliated. It was dangerous to be myself. Just imagine someone with a big voice coming into a family where there's no one to listen. Until I was 45 years old, I felt incredibly frustrated. I knew I had a contribution to make, something to say, but I didn't have a voice. I remember hours and hours of pacing back and forth saying, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Maybe this was a kind of prayer. I can't believe this is my life. I can't believe I'm not doing something. I can't believe I'm 40 and I'm a typist. I felt desperate to participate in the world and humiliated at being left out. His own desperation turned him towards the dusty backwater of his past, and he was determined to find what he felt was the gift at the heart of his defining wound, determined to confront himself with it through therapy. Not all suffering, to be sure, is redeemed with gifts and talent. Sometimes people who grow up in sick families are just crippled by it. But the cold truth about turning a wound into a gift, if that is its nature, is that first you must feel it. You've got to be willing to go back and re-encounter the grief of it, starting with the brute fact that you got a bum deal, that justice is beside the point, and no one's going to make it up to you. The past can't be changed, only your attitude towards it. Psychologist Jean Houston says that one way towards holiness is by being punched full of holes in the She stresses that wounding is an age-old training ground for teachers and healers. In order to discover what is trying to be born in you from your wound, what gift or call might be pressing for delivery, however, you need to stop reciting the small story about it, the particulars, the details, and tell the larger story. Tell the tale anew, she says, this time with the wounding in the middle of the story. As you begin to retell your story, consider that Winston Churchill, one of the world's most eloquent orators, was dyslexic and stuttered as a child, as did the actor James Earl Jones. When aviator Charles Lindbergh was a boy, he had frequent nightmares about falling from a high place. Robert Peary, the first man to reach the North Pole, and Manolete, considered the world's greatest bullfighter, were both fearful, timid children who clung to their mother's legs. Psychology would say that Manolete became a great bullfighter as compensation. But perhaps, argues James Hillman, Manolete knew he was a great bullfighter even as a 9-year-old, and that his fate was to stand in front of 1,000-pound charging bulls. So of course he held on to his mother. It's not that he was inferior. He had a great destiny, assuming that you consider bullfighting a great destiny. But his guiding spirit, which understood the true proportions of his gift, was simply working to protect it so that it wouldn't emerge before he was strong enough to carry it. Instead of seeing a childhood illness that keeps you bedridden and isolated as the cause of your later becoming a writer or a monk, says Hillman, how about imagining the call arranging for the illness so that you might practice for your later work? Instead of seeing children who stutter or cower or are excruciatingly shy as having developmental problems, consider that they may have some great thing inside them, that their symptoms are protecting a gift which, as Houston suggests, burgeons like a night mushroom beneath the protective cover of fallen leaves. At least this approach recasts victimization as preparation. I thought that was awesome. It recasts handicap as training. The puzzle, Hillman says, then becomes not, how did I get this way, or why did this happen to me, but what does my angel want with me? In Lee's case, his angel wanted him to know that there was something beyond his wound, beyond his definition of his misery, and that if a boy who clings to his mother's legs can become the greatest bullfighter in history, then another boy who had a big voice in a family with small ears and lousy reception, who was completely tongue-tied, could become a public speaker and eventually teach others how to listen and how to be heard. His angel wanted him to know that once he had touched the wound in himself, he could bring healing touch to that same wound in others. The turning point came when Lee began co-leading a professional brainstorming group in San Francisco called the Brain Exchange, through which he realized that he was trying to create the kind of environment he himself needed in order to find his voice. The steadfast rules in brainstorming are no criticism and all ideas are welcome. When Lee then turned his attention to creating what he refers to as speaking circles, he took those criteria with him as the heart of the work. In fact, instead of teaching people how to speak, he taught the group how to listen, and the speaking seemed to take care of itself. In a speaking circle, each participant takes the stage and the microphone to present a spontaneous 5-minute talk. Afterwards, the only feedback permitted is positive. Lee's theory: people already know what their shortcomings are and have had plenty of opportunities to be reminded of them. Besides, a lot of critical feedback is inaccurate anyway, more a reflection of the person giving it than the person receiving it. People really need to hear about their strengths. Once you start to be heard with absolute positive attention, even if it's only for 5 minutes a week, you'll start to say everything you need to say. The only drawback was that Lee was teaching what he needed to learn, but he was not submitting himself to the process that he had created for his own benefit. At one point, he noticed that he was making a living teaching people public speaking, but his students, not Lee himself, were making the quantum leaps in their ability to express themselves. He was standing up only long enough to present the ground rules. Then one day, when several people didn't show up for one of the circles, someone suggested that Lee get up and participate. I went up there and was just as scared as anyone doing it for the first time. But when you get into the unknown, into that awful place of maybe falling apart in front of a group, or not knowing what you're going to do when you're the center of attention, and when people keep telling you you're okay anyway, and you keep surviving it, you begin to realize there's something beyond any way you've ever seen yourself. I now get up every Wednesday. And so does Lee's father. It began when he attended one of Lee's public lectures, and Lee introduced him to the group as the man who made this work necessary. His father, who's 85 and regularly attends speaking circles, stood up and said that he is also the man who made this work possible. Nice. But that in any case, It's never too late to learn to listen. My father, Lee says, is now my student. The word history means to learn by inquiry, and in turning towards our own histories with inquiring minds, with curiosities sufficient to the immensity of them, we can heal ourselves. We can even be shown a calling. In turn, by following the calls we are shown, we can sometimes heal the past and can go back to it in order to remember ourselves, to pull ourselves together in a more solid form. The past shapes us, but by following the deep calling to heal ourselves and throw off old curses, we may be able to reshape our response to that past, and perhaps even the way in which we remember it. Sometimes we're called to move backwards so that we can move forwards with a greater sense of ourselves and with greater confidence. So there you have it.
What page number is that?
It goes from 184, I beg your pardon, 181 to 185.
Thank you.
Okay, on a personal note,
Yes.
I would say you're an excellent speaker, following what the book says to give you positive
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that positive feedback. I actually loved where it actually said here that this approach actually recasts victimization as preparation. I hadn't thought of it like that before, because we turn to, just as it says in here, we tend to think of these things as being some sort of discrepancy in ourselves, rather than some sort of preparation for what is to come. Yes, Stephen.
A little over a month ago, I was invited to speak at a seminar in Oklahoma City.
Uh-huh.
And I volunteered to speak on one particular topic. And when the flyer came out, the topic was totally different.
Oops.
I still had weeks to prepare, so I really knuckled down and did my best. And several things I could talk about, but in particular, I noticed I put together 21 pages of notes to deliver, because this was an hour and a half talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized as I was going through, at places I had to read as opposed to just use them for notes,
Uh-huh.
I was surprised because I thought, I don't read this well, out loud.
Right.
But it was just fluid. A
Uh-huh.
friend stepped up to me afterwards and said, "You've done a lot of speaking." I said, "No, I haven't." She says, "You have. You did not do or ah one time in an hour and a half."
Wow.
And she was very,
Right.
fastidious about that. The thing is, it was a process. And in that preparing,
Mm-hmm.
I went through the trials to get to the point where they wanted to hear benefit. And that support coming out of that audience
Yes.
just helped me deliver it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I was at TU, I used to help a lot of the younger kids. I used to do quick and dirty hypnosis with these kids that couldn't get up and speak in front of anybody else, and trying to get them to understand and to see that all the people in the class were not there to sit and criticize you and look at you from some kind of critical perspective. The most of them were sitting there going, "Oh my God, I've got to do this. I hope I can do it as well as she's doing it," But it wasn't any kind of personal appreciation that was going on here. But they were so desperate for the approval of Not of what they were saying. This was the thing. Most of them are actually quite confident in what they had to say, but not in the fact that they could stand up and say it. Interesting. Okay, it's all yours. John, yes.
I think there's a saying that, when you have challenges in your life, that if that didn't come, then God would have to send you another challenge to overcome that. You know what I
Learn
mean?
that
Uh-huh.
I
lesson.
can't remember how it's said, but
Yes. I think when I was growing up, it was all about crosses that you have to bear, you know. And yeah, but as we discussed last week, the thing is that adversity is generally the place that we learn the best. If everything's going along smoothly and nicely and that everything is hunky dory, then a lot of times there is no need to learn. But all of a sudden, when the shadow, that side of us that is so fearful and afraid, creeps in, that is when we learn our biggest lessons. It's through the wound, through the hurt, that it gives us compassion and empathy in order to be able to relate to others. Because how can you understand the pain of somebody else if you've not felt any pain yourself? And so adversity is, believe it or not, the best teacher, whether we like it or not. Yes, Shelley.
It reminds me a lot of my son's difficulties because he had a head injury at 9 months
Right.
that caused a lot of anxiety when he was growing up.
Yes.
And then, of course, later on in life, we had the mold exposure, which attacked his brain and caused extreme difficulties for him through high school. And I remember so vividly when he was a senior in high school and the kids in the organization that he was in had to come speak to underprivileged kids at an inner city school
Right.
that were middle school age. And all of these kids most of them were from very privileged backgrounds, and they talked about their parents being doctors and lawyers and going to Harvard and Yale and all this. And my son talked about his hardship. And the room just erupted after he was done. And so much appreciation both from the kids and the adults that were present because of his vulnerability.
Yes.
And I hope that stays with him because it's often been told to him he's
Yes.
someone that they regard as twice exceptional, kind of like the people that
Right.
they spoke of in this story who have these amazing gifts but also these extreme hardships.
Absolutely.
And I hope that stays with him and others who've had similar journeys that have not been so
Yes.
smooth, that their story matters. And their
Exactly.
experience matters.
That they matter. Yes. And I think many times we have to understand that the only way to authenticity is through vulnerability. It's laying the soul open and bare and having the courage to do that, because it's not an easy thing to do, to allow that vulnerable part of yourself to be seen by others. There is this constant fear of being hurt, of being rejected, of not being accepted. And all the while we keep looking for approval from others. And the fact of the matter is, the only real place that we can get the approval we're seeking is from ourselves. And have you noticed how all of these things, whether it's love, self-love is the only way. Forgiveness, the only way is through self-forgiveness. That is how we come to a place of forgiving others. And approval, we can't get it from anybody else. Okay, it makes you feel good for a minute or two. But the fact is, because you keep searching for it means that that one time is not enough to reassure. Does that make sense to you? Okay, I'm done. Yes, Akhilesh.
So, what I'm hearing is that we are trying to relabel something that we perceive as a challenge into an opportunity, right?
Yes.
For growth. So, I think a lot of what we do in religion or in spiritual growth is sort of relabeling our experiences into a more positive way. And I think that takes me back to what exactly do we mean by, what exactly is a challenge? Is it something that makes us feel bad emotionally, or it sort of prevents us from doing some, does it interfere with our belief system? Does it make us want to change our belief system? So, in a sense, one person's challenge could be another person's opportunity. So, for example, a person in a first world country may be feeling sorry for themselves because they don't have air conditioning or something. That might be a challenge, or
Right.
they may not have enough money, whatever. But in a third world country, that would not bother anyone not to have that, right?
Absolutely. So again, it comes back to it all being about perception. And yes, I think it is about how our emotions and feelings are affected by all of this. Because, what might feel like a wound to one person may not be perceived in that way because they were raised in a completely different environment where, Yes, Stephen?
It was the meditation, I think, that was just talking about not right view, but full view.
There you go. The complete view. Yes, exactly. Yes. Matthew.
Well,
Was
I'm
that right?
here. Yes.
Yes.
My name is Matthew. So just listening to everything I've heard so far, I thought it was something really relevant in my life that I can share.
Uh-huh.
So when it comes to the approval-seeking aspect of the conversation, much of my childhood has been spent seeking the approval of my father.
Uh-huh.
So, he grew up in a third world country. He made himself into the man he was when he was here.
Right.
And I always drove to strive for his approval, his love through my academic pursuits. And when I turned 15, my father passed away. So when I was spending my entire life seeking the approval of this man, and he disappears before
Yes.
I get to reach my point of fruition in which he can see my growth and my accomplishments. So where does that leave you, and I think that's really what led me to a search for spiritual understanding
Uh-huh.
of what brought me to where I was,
Absolutely.
and why it was necessary for him to depart at the time that he did.
Yes.
And realistically, that really led me to just focus on doing it for me,
Uh-huh.
obviously, because now that he's no longer there,
Yes.
I have to still maintain a sense of meaning
Yeah.
and purpose. And I figured that his job is done. He did what he needed to do for me to get to where I needed to
Right.
be, and give me the strength and intelligence necessary for me to be able to go on my own. And while he's not here to see it in person, I know
Uh-huh.
he's watching still.
Right.
And that I wouldn't have been able to get to where I am today if I hadn't faced these challenges, and that really his loss wasn't necessarily as much of a detriment as it needed to be. It was all really a part of
Yeah.
my process in becoming who I am.
Right. But I can tell you from personal experience that even after losing a father so young, you still go through the rest of your life constantly looking for their approval,
Definitely.
even though they've been gone. Mary.
I thought that was a lovely example of, what Oculus said too about what is it? What is the challenge? The
Yes.
challenge is anything that causes you to have the ability to think differently, or
Right.
see differently.
Right.
So it can be any number of things or any number of situations or experiences that would put you in a place where all of a sudden you see things.
It's changing the perception.
Mhm.
That is the thing. Yes, Akhilesh.
So, yeah, just to extend what Mary's saying also, so maybe the experiences lead us to change our beliefs, which in turn affect our emotions. But ultimately, I believe, I guess, but that we control our beliefs, we choose our beliefs, right? So maybe we feel it necessary to go through these experiences to change our beliefs, but we could just change our beliefs otherwise too, right? So,
Now, yeah, but I think it's a bit more difficult than that. Yes.
I think that in order to really get someplace with it, you probably do have to feel it. I am the absolute queen of not going ahead and feeling it and being able to change my beliefs and my perception and everything. And now I have a new story, so I'm charging off. And I was hit with something that I couldn't do that with.
Uh-huh.
And so, I talked to my AA sponsor, and I talked to everybody I could, and everybody is saying the same thing, and I have no understanding of what they're saying. They're like, you haven't felt this yet, you haven't processed it. And I'm like, no, I have. I understand it. This is what happened, this is how I feel. But let me tell you this just means this, and this just means that, and this isn't, intellectualizing, changing the belief system and going on, and never actually feeling the feelings because they were more difficult than I wanted to feel.
There you go.
And only letting it, just touching it enough so I could change the belief system, intellectualize it, come up with a new plan and head on down the road.
Right.
And and then someone said the strangest thing to me, and she said, everybody has already validated that these feelings are legitimate and you can feel them. When are you going to validate them and feel them?
Yeah.
That's when it's going to be okay.
Here we go.
And
Back
I'm
to,
like, well, never, because
Back-
I gotta feel them to validate them.
back to self again. Back to self. Yes, Kathy.
Well, my first experience with, I think I knew early on, even though I was raised Catholic, that I was moving in a more New Age direction in my thinking. And my mother died when I was 11, and then that catapulted me into studying everything about energy, death, life, what does it mean, blah, blah, blah. And mostly staying in an intellectual perspective about these things, but departing from traditional religion a long time ago, 16 years old or so. But it wasn't until Sean died 2.5 years ago. Well, before that, when my father died 5 years ago, I started studying mediumship, and I started using all this intellectual stuff to go into the experiential stuff of delving into the otherworldly stuff. But when Sean died, I was dropped to my knees in grief.
Yes.
I spent an entire day with my two best friends drinking and screaming and crying the day he died. And then he became my spirit guide. But that's another story. But I was catapulted into the work after that.
Right.
And now I know that from birth I was supposed to go on this journey of discovery, of being more, teaching more, showing more of that there is life after death and that we are all one and all of that. But without having to feel that,
Right.
I would not have been catapulted into
And
this
I
work.
think it takes us back to what Jeff was saying last week about once you descend into the shadow,
Right.
once you descend into that area of the shadow, the more that you acknowledge what is going on, the more power that you give to the shadow, which can act as the springboard to catapult you forward.
Right.
Yes, Jason.
So all this, it's in the past, but it's
Right.
also making me think of future sufferings, such as the movie night. Ram Dass, Albert
Yes.
Rupert, he experienced a stroke, that the last 25 years of his life was very difficult.
Right.
It was bad, and there's no coming back from that. Meaning that the lesson learned had to have been a lesson that's on a higher level, or a lesson presented to other people for them to learn.
But it's what Mary was saying about perception. It may have been that stroke was actually a gift to Ramdas.
Right.
Sometimes we need these situations, experiences, these hard, hurtful experiences.
Even not coming back out of it, like you're taking the experience to death in a way. It's almost like
Absolutely.
okay.
Jim?
That's how I learned. It's like our body talks to us in one way. It's
Uh-huh.
through pain, and it gets our attention, and then we need to do something to fix whatever it is.
Right.
Spiritually, seems like I've learned one way. It's through pain.
There you go.
That's true.
Once you're awake, is it possible that we can learn other ways also that's a little bit easier? Like with your body, you can learn through muscle testing instead of
Right.
actually having to hurt. Or, you know.
Yes, and yes, I think spiritually we can also, but generally, and I would say for every single person in here, there has been pain associated with this spiritual awakening. Shannon, you're
No, I
wanting to
totally
say
agree. I
something.
think for that individual, the message that they're to receive, there's no question that there is a depth in the experience, in the pain, for them. It doesn't matter what
Right.
others' perceptions of it are.
Yes.
Whether you're being bullied, whether you're having a disability, whatever, there's no question. It's probably a reluctance, if anything, to want to reflect on that
Absolutely.
because it is so
Because it
difficult.
is so
That's right.
painful.
That's right.
Yes, Deandra.
One place I've come to that helps me get through all that is to always remember, and ask the question, what is the bigger picture?
Uh-huh.
Because when I'm in pain, I'm identifying, say with what Eckhart Tolle calls your pain body,
Your pain
which is
body,
your astral
yes.
body. So if you're identifying with your physical body, or your emotional astral body, or your mental body, you're not identifying with you as soul, because we've gone to sleep for that.
Right.
And if there's a way you can pull yourself into the bigger picture, i.e. I am soul, I am not that, the pain goes away and you understand the bigger picture. And it's always not about the pain, it's about the growth and awakening.
Right. But I think that Jim has made a really good point. Most of us come to that place through pain, but then we have to change how we perceive it. Stephen?
Well, the key word here is experience. For some of us, the experience has to come through pain,
Yes?
but for others, it can come through an experience in meditation,
Yes.
to connect with those other levels, because those are just as sacred, just as personal,
Uh-huh. Exactly. Uncle Knight?
So I think what you're talking about is becoming one, right? So moving from duality to non-duality. So
Right.
if you look at like Buddhism or any of these other paths, they talk about how duality leads to pain and suffering. And once you get rid of duality and realize your union with everything, you can undergo physical hardship without feeling, distress.
Right.
And
But-
you can undergo experiences. And also there's this whole thing about experience and these cause effects that we are putting on things, like this causes me to do that and so on. I mean, it's valid in this reality
Yes.
to do that, but at a certain level, that's artificial, right? The cause effects that we put, because
Uh-huh.
this is an illusory world. So
Right.
obviously, everything in it is illusory. Once you are one, then you see that there is no cause effect, and then the experiences you have, from what I understand, are much more authentic in the sense that, like for example, if you're in a flow activity,
Uh-huh.
where your ego is really suppressed, the emotions and the experience you have when you're living
Right.
is, and it could be any kind of flow activity. It could be driving in the mountains or
Yeah.
meditating or whatever. I think it's still an experience. It's a rich experience. it's and the emotion you're feeling is probably akin to unconditional love for everything when
Right.
you're doing that.
Yes.
So that's when you are one. That's when you get
Okay.
rid of. So I think we're talking about moving towards that
I think
non-duality.
we are too. I think that, Barbara, you've been waiting to say something.
Well, I just want to make one comment on Ram Dass and his stroke. He went through that and through it and through it till he got to the point of where he got to the point of we live by grace,
Uh-huh.
and this was a fierce grace.
Oh, wow. A fierce grace. That's
Yes.
fabulous. I love it. Oops,
And
sorry.
the other thing was, I think as we go through that pain and we get to the point where we've accepted it and are moving through it or with it, that's when we are also able to teach from.
That's
from
another good point. Yes.
And that is one of the reasons for that pain, that we experience that pain. Some people don't go through it, and so they are not then able to transmute it, so to speak,
Right.
into a teaching for other
Interesting.
people.
Hang on, Karen. Mary, you've been waiting to
Oh,
say something.
no, I just, and we may be past it, but
Oh.
I think that, we came here to be human.
Yes.
And being human involves all the emotions and feelings, and so we balance on the teeter-totter of, moving past the pain or the situation and getting ourselves into the flow.
Right.
Trying to stay there, but then, we're kind of sliding on the other end. And so it's a constant, at least the way I see it for me,
Is-
constant moving back and forth from the center of the teeter-totter from one leg to the other
Absolutely.
as we do this.
Yes.
And
Karen, you're going to have the final word.
Okay, so as what was Mary saying, was you followed your bliss, because I can have as much learning and an example, I was in Australia and I held a koala. And so I was spiritually lifted so much to write. So as much as the pain can be there, the teeter-totter is that there can be so much joy in an experience that it
Yes.
changes who you are.
But that is the point I think that we have to appreciate. Yes, all of what we're talking about is duality. But it is through duality that we learn, and it brings us to unity. And I'll leave you with that to think about until next week.